Apache woman joked she'd be his if the cowboy found the ring she lost. Her shock when he did. The town lay quiet under the soft warmth of the afternoon sun, the kind of warmth that made every wooden porch feel like it was part of the day itself. Dust swirled lazily in the empty streets, catching the light in golden ribbons. Birds sang quietly from the branches above, while a gentle breeze rustled the leaves, carrying the faint smell of the nearby river. In this small, peaceful town, everyone knew everyone else. Faces were familiar, and names traveled quickly, along with stories of laughter, mischief, or occasional trouble. It was a place where friendships were strong, and bonds lasted for years, even generations. Among the townspeople, two figures often stood out. One was a young Apache woman, strong, lively, and full of charm. Her long dark hair always seemed to have a life of its own, dancing in the breeze as she moved. She had a sparkle in her eyes that hinted at a mischievous sense of humor, the kind that could light up a room or start a playful argument with someone in seconds. She was well known for her laughter, her kindness, and the way she seemed to notice things others did not. Even her friends often said that she could read the mood of a person just by watching the way they moved or spoke. The other was a cowboy, tall and rugged, with weathered hands that told stories of hard work and long days under the sun. His hat was always tipped just right, his boots covered in the dust of the trails he had walked. But beneath his rough exterior, he had a gentle heart and a quiet smile that appeared at just the right moment. Everyone in town knew he was dependable, the kind of person you could trust when times were hard, even if he rarely spoke much. Over the years, the Apache woman and the cowboy had grown close, sharing countless moments together. Sometimes serious, sometimes playful, but always comfortable. That particular afternoon, they found themselves sitting under the shade of a large oak tree near the edge of town. The tree's branches stretched wide, casting intricate shadows on the ground as the sunlight filtered through the leaves. The air was calm, and for a few minutes the world seemed to slow down around them. The Apache woman was fanning herself gently with a handkerchief, her eyes bright as she watched the cowboy carefully dust off a bench nearby. He, on the other hand, seemed more interested in avoiding the sun on his neck, tipping his hat lower while glancing at her from time to time. Their conversation began in the usual light-hearted way, with teasing remarks and playful jokes. The woman spoke of her day, of small troubles and funny incidents, while the cowboy listened quietly, occasionally nodding or offering a soft laugh. But soon, the conversation turned to something more personal. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, worn box, the one that held a ring she cherished deeply. It had been a gift from her grandmother, passed down through generations, and though it was small and delicate, it carried the weight of love, family, and memories. She sighed, shaking her head slightly, as if the world had just played a small trick on her. "I can't believe I lost it," she said softly, holding the empty box in her hand. "I've looked everywhere, and it's just gone." Her voice held a hint of sadness, but also a playful undertone, as if she wanted to turn her frustration into something lighter. She glanced at the cowboy, who raised an eyebrow, sensing that there was more to her words than simple disappointment. With a sudden spark of humor, she leaned back against the tree and said, "You know, if you could find this ring for me, maybe I'd be yours." She said it with a teasing smile, letting her words hang in the air. She expected him to laugh, maybe shake his head, and move on. After all, it was just a joke, a playful challenge thrown out in the warmth of the afternoon. But the cowboy's reaction surprised her. Instead of laughing, he tilted his head slightly and smiled, a quiet, determined smile that seemed to reach his eyes. "Is that a challenge?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying a note of seriousness. She laughed, thinking he was only playing along, but there was something different in the way he looked at her, something that made her pause for a moment. The town had seen their friendship grow, but in that moment, it felt as though the air between them had shifted. There was a subtle tension, a sense that the playful words had opened the door to something real. The woman laughed again, louder this time, shaking her head in disbelief. "Oh, come on! I didn't mean for you to take it seriously," she said, trying to brush off the moment. But the cowboy only nodded, his gaze steady. "I take all challenges seriously," he replied simply. It wasn't boastful or arrogant. It was just a quiet statement of intent. That moment, light as it seemed, carried weight. The challenge wasn't just about a ring. It was about care, attention, and perhaps something deeper that neither of them had admitted yet. For the rest of the afternoon, they continued talking, walking along the edge of the town where the grass met the creek. She pointed out places she might have dropped the ring, laughing nervously at the thought of losing something so important. He listened carefully, noting each detail, each small clue. The townspeople who saw them could tell that this wasn't just another casual joke. The cowboy had a purpose now. His quiet focus, his willingness to pay attention to even the smallest hints, was something that made the woman feel a mix of surprise and admiration. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the town, the woman couldn't help but feel a strange excitement. What had started as a joke had turned into something she didn't expect. A sense of anticipation, a little thrill in wondering if he might actually try to find the ring. She smiled to herself, shaking her head at the absurdity of the situation. Who would have thought that a playful challenge could feel so real? The cowboy, meanwhile, made a silent promise to himself. He would find the ring, not just to win a joke, not just to please her, but because he cared. He understood that some things, even small and delicate ones, carried meaning beyond their size or value. And in that quiet moment under the oak tree, as the wind rustled through the leaves and the sky turned soft shades of orange and pink, something unspoken passed between them, a connection, a beginning, and the start of a story that neither of them could have predicted. By the time they parted that evening, the woman returned home with a sense of curiosity and excitement. The cowboy walked back along the dusty road, thinking about the task ahead. Both of them felt the weight of possibility, though they didn't speak of it aloud. A joke had turned into a challenge into anticipation, and anticipation into something that felt like the first step toward a remarkable journey. And all around them, the town settled into quiet evening, unaware that under the golden sky, a story of love, determination, and surprise was beginning to take shape. The morning after the playful challenge, the Apache woman awoke with a quiet sense of curiosity. Sunlight streamed through the thin curtains of her small wooden home, painting golden streaks across the floor. She stretched, yawning softly, and her thoughts immediately wandered to the conversation under the oak tree. The joke she had thrown at the cowboy had seemed harmless enough at the time, just a bit of teasing to pass the afternoon. Yet now, she felt a strange mix of anticipation and anxiety. Could he really try to find the ring? Did he even care enough to make an effort? She shook her head with a small smile, brushing away her doubts. It was probably just a silly thought. But across town, the cowboy had already begun his quiet investigation. While most townsfolk were still nursing their morning coffees or sweeping dust off porches, he walked purposefully along the familiar trails she often took. Every step he took was deliberate, every glance careful. He knew the ring was small, delicate, and easy to miss, but he had something stronger than luck on his side: determination. His mind replayed the woman's words over and over, not as a joke this time, but as a challenge he intended to meet. He wasn't searching just for a piece of jewelry. He was searching for something that mattered deeply to her, something that represented her family, her history, and her heart. He began where she had last remembered seeing the ring, by the creek just outside town. The water glimmered in the early morning light, its surface reflecting the rising sun. He knelt carefully at the edge, brushing his fingers through the shallow water and feeling the soft mud beneath. Small stones rolled beneath his touch, leaves floated by, and tiny fish darted through the ripples. The cowboy moved with patience, scanning every inch of the creek, checking nooks and crannies where the ring might have slipped unnoticed. Hours passed. Sweat dampened his hatband, but he didn't give up. Meanwhile, the Apache woman carried on with her day, unaware of just how serious the cowboy's search had become. She tended her small garden, planting seeds that her grandmother had once used, each one holding memories of laughter and stories told under the same sun. As she worked, she glanced occasionally toward the creek, half expecting him to appear with a triumphant grin. The idea made her heart flutter in an unexpected way. She had intended her joke to be light, fun, and meaningless, yet a small, quiet hope had begun to grow inside her. The cowboy didn't stop at the creek. He retraced her steps from the previous week, visiting the small market where she had shopped, checking under tables and behind barrels. He asked the shopkeepers quietly if they had seen anything. A ring, a glint of gold, anything. Most people laughed at first, thinking he was joining in the playful game, but when they noticed the seriousness in his eyes, they paused. Some offered small suggestions, pointing to likely spots, while others shrugged, thinking the ring was surely gone. Yet he continued. Every clue mattered, every possibility deserved attention. By midday the sun had climbed high, and the town hummed with the usual activity. Children ran along the streets chasing a ball, their laughter echoing off wooden walls. Women carried baskets filled with fresh bread or herbs, and men returned from chores, dust clinging to their clothes. The Apache woman walked past the market, feeling a strange mix of amusement and nervousness. She had no idea that the cowboy had already spoken to half the town in search of her ring. She smiled to herself, thinking how determined he could be, yet had no inkling just how far he had gone to fulfill her playful challenge. As the afternoon approached, the cowboy moved to the outskirts of town, searching the grassy patches where she often walked her dog. The blades of grass were high in some places, and the ring could easily hide among them. He bent low, scanning the earth with careful eyes, brushing leaves aside, kneeling to inspect hollows and tiny indentations in the ground. Hours of searching had left his clothes dusty, his hands scratched, and his face smudged with the earth's marks. But he didn't pause. Determination had turned into a quiet obsession, an obsession with ensuring that something so precious to her, something she loved, was returned to its rightful place. Back at her home, the Apache woman began to feel a mixture of guilt and amazement. She realized that what started as a joke had transformed into a serious matter for him. She imagined him walking under the sun, checking every corner, every shadow, and she felt a small pang of emotion, surprise, respect, and a hint of admiration she hadn't expected. Her playful challenge had stirred something more than curiosity in him. It had brought out a level of care and commitment she rarely saw, and it made her think about the depth of his character in ways she hadn't before. By late afternoon, the cowboy had expanded his search to the wooded area beyond the creek. The light was softer now, filtered through the branches, turning everything into golden green patterns. He crouched low, brushing aside fallen leaves, moving small branches, and gently shifting the soil where he thought the ring could have fallen. Each time his fingers touched something metal, his heart jumped, but each time it was a small nail, a button, or an unimportant piece of debris. Disappointment. Yet he remained patient, unshaken. He knew that persistence was the only way to achieve something meaningful. At the same time, the Apache woman sat on the porch of her home, her thoughts wandering to the cowboy. She remembered their childhood conversations, their shared laughter, and the small, meaningful gestures he had always made for her. A memory of him handing her water on a hot summer day made her smile. A laugh escaped her lips, soft and reflective. It surprised her how much she cared about someone who had always seemed so calm and steady, someone who never rushed or demanded attention but simply showed up when it mattered. Evening approached and the cowboy had not yet given up. The creek shimmered under the setting sun, reflecting pinks and oranges across the water. He paused for a moment to wipe his brow and catch his breath, then looked around at the fading light. Shadows stretched across the ground, making the search harder, but not impossible. His eyes scanned the earth, and finally he noticed a small glint near the roots of an old willow tree. Heart racing, he moved closer, brushing away leaves and soil with careful fingers. There, almost as if it had been waiting for him, lay the small, delicate ring, catching the last rays of the sun. He picked it up gently, cradling it as if it were the most fragile treasure in the world. In that moment, the challenge had transformed from a playful game into something far deeper. He held it with care, thinking about the woman, her laughter, her trust, and her family history embedded in this tiny object. It was no longer just a ring. It was a symbol of everything he felt for her, and everything he was willing to do to show it. The Apache woman, meanwhile, prepared for a quiet evening, unaware that the cowboy had found the ring. She hummed softly to herself as she lit a small lamp, thinking about the strange joy and curiosity she felt earlier that day. Little did she know, the very object she had joked about, the ring she thought was lost forever, was now safely in his hands. The stage was set for a moment neither of them would forget, a moment that would turn a joke into a story of love, patience, and determination. By the time the sky darkened and stars began to twinkle overhead, the cowboy had made his way back into town. Dusty and tired, yet triumphant, he carried the ring with care. He knew that tomorrow would bring the true surprise. The moment the Apache woman realized he had actually accomplished what she had thought impossible. And as the town settled into quiet night, the two of them remained unaware that their lives were about to change in the most unexpected way. The morning sun rose slowly over the small town, painting the sky with soft shades of pink and gold. A gentle breeze whispered through the streets, rustling the leaves of trees and carrying the scent of fresh earth and blooming flowers. The Apache woman stepped outside her home, stretching her arms as she felt the warmth of the early day. She had been thinking about the cowboy all morning, remembering his calm, determined expression from the previous day when he had taken her playful challenge seriously. She shook her head and laughed softly to herself, wondering why she felt a flutter in her chest at the thought of him searching for her lost ring. The cowboy, meanwhile, was already moving through the town, dust clinging to his boots, hat tilted just so against the sun. He had not slept much the night before, thinking through every possible place the ring could be. He walked with purpose, each step measured, as he retraced every trail the woman might have taken. To him, this was more than a simple task. It was a test of patience, dedication, and perhaps even courage. The small, delicate ring was a symbol of something precious to her, something that mattered more than its size or value. He had promised himself that he would not stop until he found it. He began his search at the familiar places she visited daily. First, he walked to the market where she had been the day before. He asked quietly, almost humbly, if anyone had seen a small golden ring. The shopkeepers paused, some smiling at the earnestness in his eyes, some raising their eyebrows at his unusual dedication. A few offered guesses, pointing to corners of the shop or under shelves, and he inspected each suggestion carefully. Nothing. But he didn't falter. He thanked everyone politely and moved on, knowing that even the smallest chance was worth exploring. Next, he visited the little creek that ran along the edge of town. The water sparkled in the early sunlight, flowing gently over smooth stones, carrying the soft reflection of the sky. He knelt on the bank, brushing aside grass and leaves, peering into the shallow water. Tiny fish darted between his fingers, oblivious to the human world above. Every time he touched a small stone or a piece of debris, his heart jumped, hoping to find a glimmer of gold. But again, nothing. Still, he remained patient. He believed that persistence always rewarded effort, even if it took time. As he searched, the Apache woman went about her day, tending her small garden. She planted seeds carefully, recalling the stories her grandmother had told her about each plant. The memory brought a soft smile to her face. At times she glanced toward the creek, half expecting the cowboy to appear with a triumphant grin and her lost ring in hand. She laughed softly, thinking it unlikely, but she couldn't stop imagining the surprise on her own face if it actually happened. It was strange, but she realized that the thought of someone caring enough to search for her cherished possession made her feel unexpectedly warm inside. By midday, the sun was high and bright, turning the small town into a glittering landscape of wood, stone, and dust. The cowboy had expanded his search beyond the creek. He wandered into the grassy fields where she often walked her dog. The tall blades of grass whispered secrets to the wind, hiding small treasures beneath their shade. He crouched low, brushing aside leaves, peering into every hollow and indentation, moving stones and twigs. Hours passed, and his body grew tired. His hands were scratched, dusty and sore, but he refused to give up. The thought of the woman's laughter, her playful teasing, and the significance of the ring pushed him onward. Meanwhile, townsfolk began to notice him moving from place to place, searching with careful attention. Some of them smiled, whispering about his dedication. Others simply shook their hands, thinking it was amusing that someone would take a playful joke so seriously. But the cowboy didn't care about gossip. He cared only about completing the task he had quietly set for himself. Each small clue, each glimmer of hope, kept him moving forward. And in his heart, the challenge had grown into something more. Something that meant proving not just his persistence, but also his respect and care for the woman. Back in her home, the Apache woman paused from her garden work and gazed at the horizon. She felt a strange mixture of curiosity and excitement. She had intended the challenge as a joke, a playful way to tease the cowboy, but she couldn't deny that part of her hoped he would actually try. There was something in the way he carried himself, in his quiet determination, that made her heart beat faster. She realized she had underestimated him. He wasn't just persistent, he was thoughtful, careful, and capable of surprising her in ways she had never imagined. As the afternoon stretched on, the cowboy moved toward the outskirts of town, near the wooded area where she sometimes wandered to gather herbs. The trees cast long shadows across the ground, creating a patchwork of light and dark. He crouched low, moving fallen leaves, small branches, and soft soil, searching every likely spot. Each time his fingers brushed something metallic, his heart jumped. Sometimes it was a small nail, sometimes a button, sometimes a forgotten coin. Each false alarm only made him more careful, more determined. He knew the ring was there somewhere. He just had to find it. By now, the Apache woman had taken a break from her daily chores and sat on her porch, sipping water and reflecting on the day. She thought about their friendship, all the little moments that had led to this playful challenge, and the strange emotion she felt when she imagined him searching. A sense of admiration and gratitude began to grow inside her. She realized that someone willing to care this much about a small, personal treasure must have a heart as patient and loyal as his.
It was a surprising feeling, one she wasn't used to experiencing.
The cowboy, still searching, finally paused as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon. Dust clung to his clothes, and the muscles in his arms ached from bending and kneeling for hours. But he didn't give up. Something near the roots of an old willow tree caught his eye, a small glimmer of gold, almost hidden beneath the fallen leaves. His heart raced as he moved closer, gently brushing away debris with careful hands. And there it was, the ring, resting quietly, as though it had been waiting for him all along. He picked it up gently, cradling it, as though it were the most delicate treasure in the world. The ring was small, simple, and beautiful, but to him, it now carried a deeper meaning. It symbolized the trust, care, and connection between him and the woman. It wasn't just a lost piece of jewelry. It was a sign of her world, her family, and the little joke that had turned into a challenge of patience, love, and attention. He felt a sense of triumph, yes, but also a quiet joy at being able to restore something that mattered so much to her. Meanwhile, the Apache woman returned to her garden as the sun began to lower, casting a warm glow over the town. She hummed softly, tending the last plants of the day, unaware that the cowboy had already accomplished what seemed impossible. She had joked about the ring, laughed about the idea of it being lost forever, and yet, soon, she would be faced with a moment she could never have imagined, a moment of surprise, gratitude, and perhaps even the beginning of something new between them. As the evening approached, the town settled into its familiar quiet rhythm. Windows glowed softly with the warm light of oil lamps. The streets were emptying, and the world seemed to pause in the soft hush of twilight. The cowboy walked back toward the town center, dust-streaked and tired, holding the ring carefully in his hand. He knew that tomorrow would bring the moment the Apache woman realized he had truly found it. And as the stars began to appear in the sky, the stage was set for the next part of their story, a moment that would turn a playful challenge into an unforgettable memory. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with sunlight spilling over the town in warm golden rays. Birds chirped cheerfully in the trees, and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze created a peaceful soundtrack to the day. The Apache woman rose from her bed, stretching and yawning as she opened the window. She inhaled deeply, feeling the fresh air fill her lungs, and for a moment she allowed herself to forget about the lost ring. After all, it had been a joke yesterday, and though she had teased the cowboy, she never really expected him to actually find it. She smiled softly, thinking about how determined he was, and shook her head with a gentle laugh. Meanwhile, across town, the cowboy was already moving quietly through the streets. Dust clung to his boots, and his hat shielded him from the morning sun. In his hand he carried the small, delicate ring that had taken him hours to find the previous day. Every step he took was measured and careful, as if he were carrying not just a piece of jewelry, but a treasure filled with memories, trust, and hope. He thought about the Apache woman, her laughter, her playful teasing, and the bond that had grown between them over the years. Today he would return the ring to her, and in doing so he knew he would reveal more than just the small gold band. He would show the depth of his care and dedication. The Apache woman went about her morning, tending to her small chores around the house. She swept the porch, arranged the herbs she had collected, and checked on the small garden she loved so much. Every now and then she glanced toward the path where the cowboy usually walked, half expecting him to appear at any moment. She chuckled to herself, imagining him stumbling along, dusty and tired, only to surprise her with the lost ring. It was an amusing thought, but she didn't take it too seriously. After all, it had been a joke, and a joke usually stayed a joke. As the morning passed, the cowboy approached her home, moving slowly so that she would not see him from the window too soon. He stopped for a moment behind a tree, taking a deep breath and adjusting his hat. The small ring sparkled faintly in his hand as the sunlight hit it, catching his eye. He knelt for a moment on the soft grass, thinking about the journey that had brought him here. The search along the creek, the careful inspection of every corner of town, and the long hours spent in determination. Each step of the search had reminded him of her kindness, her humor, and the way she always noticed the small details that others overlooked. Finally, he walked up the path leading to her house. He could see her from a distance, busy with her garden, completely unaware of the small treasure he carried. His heart beat a little faster with anticipation. How would she react when she realized that he had actually found the ring? Would she be surprised? Amazed? Perhaps even a little flustered? He smiled to himself, imagining the sparkle in her eyes when she saw it. The thought made him quicken his pace slightly, careful not to stumble as he approached. The Apache woman, meanwhile, had just finished arranging her flowers in a small wooden vase. She turned and noticed movement at the edge of her garden. Her eyes widened slightly when she recognized the cowboy walking toward her, his posture calm but purposeful. "Good morning," she said softly, brushing her hands on her apron. "You're up early today." He smiled in return, holding out his hand carefully so that she could see what he carried. "I believe this belongs to you," he said quietly, his voice steady but filled with warmth. In his palm rested the small, delicate ring, glinting in the sunlight just as it had when she first received it from her grandmother. For a moment, she simply stared at it, unable to speak. The world around her seemed to pause. The birds stopped singing, the breeze held its breath, and even the sunlight felt as if it waited for her reaction. Her first instinct was disbelief. She laughed softly, shaking her head in astonishment. I can't believe it," she whispered, stepping closer to inspect the ring. Her fingers trembled slightly as she took it from his hand. It was exactly as she remembered it, small, delicate, and perfect. Memories of her grandmother, of childhood stories, of the countless times she had admired the ring, all rushed back in a wave of emotion. How did you find it?" she asked, her voice a mixture of wonder and amazement. The cowboy shrugged lightly, a small, modest smile on his face. "I just kept looking," he said simply. "I knew it was important to you, so I couldn't stop until I found it." There was no boastfulness in his tone, only sincerity. And in that moment, the Apache woman realized that his effort went far beyond a simple challenge. He had searched tirelessly, carefully, and with a quiet dedication that spoke volumes about his character and the depth of his feelings. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked quickly to hold them back. The ring had returned to her hand, yes, but it was more than that. The gesture, the effort, the patience, and the thoughtfulness behind it all left her speechless. She looked at him, her playful teasing from yesterday replaced by a mixture of admiration, gratitude, and something deeper she hadn't yet fully understood. I didn't think anyone could find it," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "I really didn't think anyone could." He smiled gently, stepping closer but keeping a respectful distance. "Sometimes the things that seem impossible only need patience and care," he replied. His eyes met hers, steady and sincere. "I wanted to make sure something so important to you didn't stay lost." His words carried more than their surface meaning. They conveyed his respect, his consideration, and the quiet affection he had felt for her for a long time. The Apache woman held the ring in her hand, turning it over and over, feeling its weight and remembering the stories behind it. A small laugh escaped her lips, half disbelief and half amazement. "I joked about this yesterday," she said, smiling shyly, "but I never imagined you would actually do it. I I don't know what to say." Her voice softened, and her eyes shone with a mixture of awe and joy. She realized that the cowboy had taken her joke and turned it into a demonstration of his care, a proof of his patience, and a sign of something far deeper than friendship. For a few quiet moments, they simply stood there under the morning sun. The world seemed to hold its breath around them. The wind rustled gently through the trees, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers and fresh earth. Birds resumed their songs, the town continued its quiet rhythm. But for the Apache woman and the cowboy, time had slowed. The lost ring had been found, yes, but what truly mattered was the journey, the effort, the thought, and the deep connection that had been revealed in the process. Finally, she placed the ring on her finger, feeling its delicate weight and the history it carried. She looked up at the cowboy, her eyes bright with emotion, and smiled. I don't think I've ever been this surprised in my life," she admitted softly. You really did it." He nodded quietly, his own heart warmed by her reaction. "I told you," he said with a small grin. "I take challenges seriously." There was a playfulness in his tone, but it was tempered by sincerity, making her laugh softly. The moment was perfect, filled with laughter, relief, admiration, and the quiet thrill of connection. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the two of them sat together on the porch, talking softly and sharing the simple joy of the moment. The ring rested safely on her finger, and a new sense of closeness had taken root between them. What had started as a playful joke had transformed into something real, something meaningful. And in that peaceful morning light, both of them understood that this moment, the discovery, the effort, the shared emotion, was a turning point. It marked the beginning of a story that neither of them had expected, a story filled with trust, dedication, and the possibility of something far greater than a simple joke. The sun had climbed high in the sky, casting a warm golden glow over the small town. The streets were alive with quiet activity. Children ran in playful circles. Vendors arranged their fresh fruits and baked goods, and townsfolk greeted each other with friendly smiles. But for the Apache woman and the cowboy, the world seemed to slow, as if it too recognized the significance of what had happened. The lost ring had been found, and with it, a moment of unexpected clarity had entered their lives. It was more than just a recovered treasure. It was a symbol of trust, care, and a bond that neither of them could ignore any longer. The Apache woman sat on her porch, her fingers gently turning the delicate ring on her hand. She traced the smooth edges with a quiet reverence, remembering the stories her grandmother had told her about the ring, how it had been passed down through generations, carrying love, hope, and the resilience of the women in her family. And now in her hand it was whole again, restored by someone who had cared enough to search tirelessly for it. Her mind wandered to the cowboy, and a soft smile appeared on her face. She thought of his steady determination, his quiet strength, and the way he had carried out the challenge without expecting praise or reward. The cowboy, meanwhile, leaned against the railing of her porch, watching her carefully. There was a subtle pride in his expression, but also a gentle humility. He had completed the task, yes, but more than that, he had demonstrated something that could not be measured in words alone. He had shown patience, thoughtfulness, and a willingness to go beyond the ordinary to prove that he cared. And as he watched her now, seeing the ring return to its rightful place, he felt a quiet joy settle in his chest. The woman looked up at him, her eyes meeting his. "I still can't believe you actually found it." she said softly, her voice filled with wonder. "I didn't think anyone could. I never expected it." Her tone carried a mixture of amazement, relief, and a growing admiration she hadn't realized was there before. She laughed softly, shaking her head in disbelief. "I guess my joke wasn't as impossible as I thought, huh?" The cowboy smiled gently, tipping his hat slightly. "Nothing is impossible if it matters enough," he replied. His words were simple, yet they carried a depth that made her pause. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of gratitude, admiration, and something far more tender. She realized that his actions had gone beyond a playful challenge. He had shown her that he valued her and the things that mattered to her, no matter how small. For the rest of the morning they sat together on the porch, talking quietly and enjoying the peaceful rhythm of the town around them. They spoke of ordinary things, small chores, memories of past days, and dreams for the future. Yet beneath the surface of their conversation, an unspoken understanding was growing. Both of them were aware of the deeper connection that had formed through the challenge of finding the ring. A bond built on trust, care, and the quiet certainty that they could rely on each other in ways neither had fully realized before. The townspeople who had noticed the cowboys' relentless search over the past days began to murmur among themselves. Some smiled knowingly, recalling the playful challenge and the surprising dedication he had shown. Others whispered about the spark that had grown between the two of them, recognizing that what had begun as a joke had transformed into something real and meaningful. And while the Apache woman and the cowboy did not speak of it openly yet, the shared glances and quiet smiles between them told the story that words could not capture. As the sun moved toward midday, the woman stood and walked to the edge of the porch, holding the ring carefully in her hand. She turned to the cowboy, a shy but genuine smile on her face. "You know," she said softly, "I never imagined a joke could lead to something like this. But I'm glad it did." Her eyes sparkled with emotion, and he could see the gratitude and admiration shining in her gaze. She laughed lightly, shaking her head in disbelief at the turn of events. "I guess some jokes are worth taking seriously after all." The cowboy stepped closer, his expression gentle and sincere. "I knew it was important to you," he said quietly. "And when something matters to someone you care about, well, it matters to you too." His words carried a truth that was impossible to ignore. In that moment, the Apache woman felt a rush of warmth and understanding. She realized that the feelings she had kept hidden, even from herself, were mirrored in him. His actions had spoken louder than any words ever could. A soft breeze passed through the town, carrying the scent of fresh earth, blooming flowers, and the faint warmth of the sun on the wooden buildings. The Apache woman held out her hand, letting him see the ring once more. "I guess this means more than just finding a lost ring," she said, her voice filled with a mix of amusement and sincerity. "It means that you care. That you really care." He nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Yes," he replied simply. "I care about you. About the things that matter to you, and I wanted to show you that." There was a pause, a quiet moment filled with understanding and unspoken words. Neither of them needed to rush, nor did they need to explain everything. The gesture, the effort, and the shared experience had already said more than words ever could. The afternoon passed slowly, each moment rich with connection. They shared stories of their childhood, memories of family and friends, and small details of their everyday lives. Each story, each laugh, each glance drew them closer together, strengthening the bond that had begun with a playful joke and grown into something real. The Apache woman found herself noticing small things about the cowboy: his steady hands, the calm confidence in his movements, and the quiet patience that had guided him through the search. And he, in turn, noticed her warmth, her humor, and the gentle strength that had always made her unique. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long golden shadows across the town, they stood together at the edge of the porch, looking out at the familiar streets. The world felt peaceful, steady, and full of possibility. The lost ring had been found, but more importantly, Something far greater had been discovered, a connection built on trust, care, and shared moments that neither would forget. Finally, the Apache woman turned to him, her eyes bright with emotion. "You know," she said softly, "I think I may have to take that first joke seriously after all." Her smile was shy, playful, and full of warmth. The cowboy chuckled quietly, tipping his hat with a grin. "I was hoping you would," he replied. There was laughter, relief, and a shared joy in that simple exchange, a recognition that a new chapter in their lives had begun. The town continued its quiet rhythm around them, the sounds of daily life blending with the fading light of the evening. But for the Apache woman and the cowboy, nothing else mattered. The ring rested safely on her finger, a symbol of her family and the journey they had shared. And the bond between them, forged through patience, care, and a playful challenge turned real, had grown into something that promised laughter, trust, and love for the days ahead. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, they walked together through the familiar streets, side by side. Their steps were unhurried, their hearts light, and their minds full of hope. What had started as a joke had become a story of dedication, surprise, and connection. And as they disappeared into the soft glow of the evening, one thing was certain: the bond between them would last, and the playful challenge that began with a lost ring had transformed into a beginning neither of them would ever forget.